And we're back for the second episode of PA Political Digest podcast, a stroll through the annals of Pennsylvania political corruption. Thanks for being with us. A disgraced attorney general whose twin sister also worked there, who went down for lying to the court. Two former House speakers shared the same prison cell for a time. Not one, not two, but three Republican sisters taken down, two of whom were elected officials, and one was their campaign manager. An entire Philadelphia court system eliminated due to fraud and corruption. A powerful Philadelphia state senator with a vacuum fixation, yes, a vacuum fixation, funded by OPM, other people's money, not his. Congressmen taking bribes from fake Arab sheiks. A GOP attorney general went down by what he did in his previous job, who still managed to finish second in the 1994 Republican primary for governor. Multiple state treasurers were indicted, and one who very tragically and publicly killed himself during a press conference live on TV. Even the Capitol building itself was christened with corruption during a scandal when it was built in the early 1900s that in today's dollars would equal nearly $500 million. So as you can see, we have lots to talk about on the Pennsylvania Political Digest podcast, a stroll through the annals of Pennsylvania political corruption. And once again, I am joined by two grizzled veterans of Pennsylvania political journalism. First, let's welcome recently retired Capitol reporter Brad Bumstead. Hi, Brad.
Hi, Chris. It's great to be here. Thanks for having us.
As a reminder, Brad's written 2 books on political corruption in PA and wrote for the Lancaster News Group and the Pittsburgh Tribune Review, among others. And we're joined by the semi-retired political journalist John Baer, formerly the political columnist for the Philadelphia Daily News. Hi, John.
Hi, Chris. How are you?
Good. John now writes a weekly column for Penn Live Patriot News and has written 1 book on Pennsylvania politics. In this episode, we will look at the Bonusgate and Computergate scandals, scandal cousins, really, that roiled the Capitol in the late aughts and early 2010s. It ensnared multiple legislators and top staff. In the end, 2 ex-House speakers ended up in jail at the same time. And in another only in Pennsylvania moment, those 2 were cellmates for a time. That's our primary focus today. Our secondary focus is on 3 GOP sisters, 2 of whom were elected officials who went down for abusing the system. One of them, as punishment, received something you may have gotten back in elementary school. More on that later. And we'll look at an entire Philadelphia court system that got shut down because of corruption, and a Republican Supreme Court justice taken down because of so-called porn emails. So as you can hear, we have lots to do in episode number 2. And to start it off on the basics of Bonusgate and Computergate, Brad, we're going to start with you.
Thank you, Chris. Bonusgate rocked the Capitol from 2008 to 2012, and it did have various tentacles that crossed over into other investigations. But at its core, Bonusgate was an investigation by the Attorney General of Pennsylvania, Tom Corbett at the time, who got the case by accident. There was a story that appeared in the Harrisburg Patriot, Penn Live, from a Democratic staffer. They said had been this memo that went out to Democratic staffers from Bill DeWeese, then the Democratic leader, saying, look, if you got a bonus, don't talk about it. It didn't say anything about campaign work. It just said, if you got one, don't talk about it. And naturally, though, a lot of people started saying, wait a minute, I didn't get a bonus. Or, what happened with this? And as it turned out, after the investigation gets underway, clearly the people who got, a lot of the people who got bonuses, it was about $1.4 million worth of bonuses, got it for campaign work. Some didn't.
Now, to be clear, Brad, this was state-paid employees getting paid bonuses with state dollars for doing campaign work to get their bosses reelected, correct?
That's exactly right. And getting a bonus was not a crime. A lot of people got the bonus, but if you directed people, forced people to work for you and used tax money to pay for it, that was a crime. And that's what led to convictions of, in the end, with its various cousins, as you put it, 22 different officials of leaders and staffers and other reps who were convicted of felonies, and most of whom went to prison. So the main offshoot of Bonusgate, of course, becomes Computergate, which is the Republican version. Corbett was under tremendous pressure, public pressure, to not just investigate Democrats, but what's he doing about the Republicans? Is he investigating them? Governor Ed Rendell, in fact, a Democrat, had said at a news conference, I don't see any investigations of Republicans. What's Corbett doing with this? So he ramps up an investigation, and it's called Computergate. And it was the same concept. It wasn't bonuses, but they were using all this computer equipment purchased by the state taxpayers and using that for political purposes to run Republican campaigns, to get an edge. And Purcell was eventually convicted of directing $10 million of computer equipment.
So the Purcell you mentioned was John Purcell, a Republican state rep from Philadelphia and a former boss of mine way back in the day, who rose to become Republican leader and then House Speaker.
Well, that's right. He was from Philadelphia, and he was a really, brazen, larger-than-life figure at the Capitol as a speaker. But, he went down over this and eventually, did wind up in the same prison cell with Bill DeWeese, who had been a speaker. So you have two speakers. And I've since made some inquiries about that. How did that happen, that the two of them wound up in the same cell? Was it just somebody playing a practical joke? Was it just, a coincidence? And the best theory that I can get from some people close to it is they looked at these two guys who were coming in the system about the same time and said, look, we're better off putting these guys with each other.
So the way the prison system works in Pennsylvania is the prison in Camp Hill is kind of an intake center where they get people in and figure out the best place to put them. And so Purcell and DeWeese, who, yes, were both ex-House speakers, both ex-floor leaders, both convicted of various gates. We have to use gate all the time now.
Well, that's right. They didn't, become permanent roommates. Purcell, in fact, got sent to a home for elderly patients. He wasn't elderly at the time, but elderly and medical patients in western Pennsylvania, whereas DeWeese got sent to a rather hard-nosed prison in northeastern Pennsylvania.
John, your thoughts?
Well, my thoughts on both of these cases are the two guys that were at the top of the pile, and they couldn't have been more different or more interesting. I mean, let's take DeWeese first. I mean, just a character without any reservations. I mean, this guy was born in Pittsburgh, raised in rural Greene County, went to Wake Forest and was a baseball player, had a walk-on one season at Wake Forest. Years later, even at age 65, he used to go to Pirates fantasy camps in Florida. He had his own baseball card. And he was a Marine. He was elected to the House at 26 years old back in 76. Flamboyant, gregarious, vocabulary whiz. 36 years he served, and he was known for his bow ties and dressing well. He used to wear bullet cufflinks on days of gun votes. He was a lifetime member of the NRA. Really a liberal Democrat in the way that Southwestern pals are often liberal Democrats, pro-gun, pro-union, but really a friendly kind of guy. He quickly rose in the legislature. He became the first non-lawyer to chair the House Judiciary Committee, and of course ended up as Speaker after he mounted a coup to oust Philadelphia's Bob O'Donnell, who at the time was trying to trim some members' perks, which of course nobody liked in the chamber, and DeWeese took the lead. So he knew his vocabulary. He used every inch of it. I remember on the first day of his trial in Dauphin County, I watched the Dauphin County jury file in, and then I watched DeWeese, and when they looked at DeWeese, and the Dauphin County jury comes largely from a rural area here in central Pennsylvania. They looked at DeWeese. I turned to whoever was sitting next to me and said, guilty, because of the way he was dressed, the way he carried himself, was not in accordance with the Dauphin County jury of his peers. I visited him in prison at his invitation at Hummock Creek, which had been an insane asylum, I think, outside of, maybe still is, outside of Wilkes-Barre. And one of my favorite stories of Deweese told me was when he was at one of these fantasy camps in Florida, they actually wore uniforms and they got to pick their number. So Deweese wanted number 1, which was his high school number. And somebody in the crowd yelled out, no, give him 2 to 5. So, now on the other side, on the Computergate side, you had an absolute opposite of Bill Deweese. John Purcell, extremely rare in that he was a Republican with power from Philadelphia, almost unheard of in Pennsylvania politics. He came up from the streets, went to Troy University in Alabama. After that, he, for years, was a waiter and then a maitre d' at a restaurant called Pavio's in Northeast Philly. And his nickname was Billy's Boy because he was a protege of longtime GOP city leader Billy Meehan. He was elected in 78, just 2 years after Deweese, climbed all the way to speaker, briefly was talking about running for mayor, briefly considered a run for governor. And along the way, and by the way, he was a furious fundraiser in his later years. He was sort of a Newt Gingrich type of iron-fisted partisan. He was known as the Darth Vader of the Republican caucus, and he was viciously blunt. His language, again, opposite Deweese, was street-like and just really, really tough. I mean, he once called his constituents, quote, the little people. He used tax dollars to pay for untraceable, dirty trick phone calls to those that crossed him. He was not a smooth talker. In a radio interview, he once said that it was a badge of honor for young Hispanics to get their girlfriends pregnant. And he told the Philadelphia Tribune, a famous, long-standing black newspaper in the city, that was questioning him about Republicans hiring blacks, and he said, quote, "You want me to hire 50 African Americans and make them pages like Democrats do? I want people who can move up, not get my soda." He opposed teaching African American history in Philly schools by saying, quote, "Most of these kids will never go to Africa." And maybe my personal favorite was he was doing a school visit and when he was speaker, and a fourth grader asked him, "Did you come in a limo?" He said, "I came in a car." But a television reporter in Philly followed him out to a black Lincoln Town car with limo plates and a driver and said, "Why did you lie to that little girl?" Purcell, as was his custom, didn't answer. He was maybe the toughest interview for most journalists because you could literally walk beside him in the hallways of the Capitol, ask him a question, and he wouldn't acknowledge your existence. I mean, he would just keep going. And he normally would, if it was a question about legislation, he normally would answer with, "Well, I don't know, you tell me. You're the one that knows everything. Do you have 102 votes? If you have 102 votes, then it's going to pass. I don't know, you tell me." And then he would just keep going. And to give you an example of his political prowess, when he won re-election in 2000, he won by 92 votes. And at the time, he was leader of the caucus. And he almost lost to a young kid by the name of Mark Chaluti, who campaigned in a wheelchair because he had been shot. He owned a jewelry store. And he campaigned on gun violence, and he campaigned on longevity, that Purcell had been there long enough. So after recounts and a Purcell victory by 92 votes, he used his power to do redistricting, reapportionment, and he cut out the city's 62nd ward from his district because that ward had supported his Democratic opponent.
So these guys, Purcell and Deweese, came from two very different worlds politically. Bill Deweese, Southwestern Pennsylvania Democrat, where as long as you won the primary, you were in. John Purcell lost his first race for State House in 1976 because the top of the ticket then, Gerald Ford, John Hines, didn't do well in Philly, but he didn't stop campaigning. He's kept campaigning straight through to 1978, relentless drive type of guy who just knocked on everybody's door all the time, registered people. When he won in 1978, John, his legislative district was 29% Republican. When I worked for him in 1990, he was head of the House Republican Campaign Committee then, and I was the political director. So from 1978 to 1990, he changed the district to a majority Republican status. So he had to work hard at keeping his district for himself. Unlike a Deweese and other, at the time, southwestern PA Democrats who never had to worry about a general election. So two very, very different men, two very different worlds. And you're right, Deweese would, never use 10 syllables to tell you something when he could use 30 syllables. And John Purcell would never say in 8 words what he could say in 1 word.
And Chris, where he got all those big words, when he was in college and then in the Marines, his mother would clip word of the day out of their local newspaper and mail every single one of them to him. And, he credited her for that, that he absorbed all these words as a result of it.
This is Bill Deweese, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's his mother. I met her. She was there for some of his trial. It was very sad and very difficult for her to watch that. But with Purcell and with Deweese, Bonusgate, Computergate, none of this would have really gotten to the level that it did if it hadn't been for a state representative, largely not well known at all, named Representative Jeffrey Habay. He had routinely forced his staff to campaign for him. It wasn't just using tax money for campaigns. He made them do it. It was a prerequisite of working there. And this was really the prequel to Bonusgate because it's a long, involved case, but eventually Habay loses and he appeals to Superior Court. The Superior Court judge who hears that case, his name is Bob Coville. He's the former DA in Allegheny County. Coville was Corbett's boss when Tom Corbett, the Attorney General, worked in the District Attorney's office in Pittsburgh. And anyway, Coville issues a ruling that says if you use state money for campaigns, that inures to a personal benefit for you and raise the level of it to a felony. There might have been other misdemeanor cases, but it's what really gave Corbett a tool to go after a lot of these people.
This Pennsylvania Political Digest podcast is supported by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association, where business in Pennsylvania is our business and has been since our founding in 1909. For more information, please visit pamanufacturers.org.
So this was a real sea change in how the state government worked, because for eons, both parties, it was expected that, you had to help your boss get reelected. Now, sometimes it was benign. It was after hours, putting up yard signs, those types of things. But unchecked, it became kind of de rigueur that you just had to do this on state time, not with this whole, it was a comp day or vacation. And Corbett eventually then, as the Republican Attorney General, he got into all of this after Habay and used the change that happened with Habay to then go after all these other state reps and their staffers.
He did that, and he warned them at a news conference after the Habay case had been concluded. He said, look, I'm painting a bright blue line here. This is real clear. You don't cross this line. I don't know what happened in the past, but, from now on, here's a court ruling that says that it's for personal gain. Don't do it. And if you do it, we're going to come after you. And he did. And of course, it had a lot to do with Corbett's ineffectiveness as governor, the fact that he was real good at prosecuting legislators while Attorney General. And there was never a real trust on the part of legislative leaders of Corbett. They never liked him for what he did. They never really forgave him.
Yeah, that's one of the interesting things about all of this is that, Chris, you're right. Prior to this, politics and government are kind of intermeshed. People were used to, if you're working for an elected official, your primary work is to get him reelected. And if that's good constituent service, that's what you do. And if it's helping with campaigns, talking to donors, putting up yard signs, that's what you do. The difference here, of course, was just handing out state tax dollars to people to do the work as if they were paid consultants. And the whole thing with Corbett, there were a lot of people that suspected that, look, this is really about getting him elected governor. He's going to show the entire state I know this legislature is awful. I know there's terrible people in there, and I'm going to get them. So the investigation was politically suspect. And Brad, you're right. I mean, Tom Corbett was a much more effective attorney general than governor. And I've always thought, as you just said, that part of that had to have been an underlying distrust that, look, this guy wrecked our culture. And why would we help him now?
And it didn't help that his liaison with the legislature, his director of legislation, happened to be one of the bonus gate prosecutors. So what do you do if you're a legislative leader and this guy walks in and he's up in the courtroom all the time, where they prosecuted?
Yeah, you want to see if he's wearing a wire at the time.
Yeah, But it's just so difficult for people to understand how political this really was, too. Corbett did good investigations. These were valid investigations involving the use of tax money. But you can look at it through the eyes of Mike Vion, a Democratic leader who was convicted, who was probably the prime person in the first trial. His attorney, Dan Rainak, who came in from Arizona to represent him, and Joel Sansone, they looked at this as a political trial, and they called it that. I mean, here you've got, it's right before the Republican primary for governor, you've got a Republican attorney general running for governor, and he's prosecuting a Democratic leader in the courtroom. To them, it's like crazy. How could this be happening? In fact, Sansone later referred to Vion as a Nelson Mandela type.
Well, if there is a person in the universe more different than Nelson Mandela, it was Mike Vion. Mike Vion had a big handlebar mustache, wore pinstripe mafia-like suits. He was from Beaver County back when Beaver County was reliably Democratic. Like a lot of these polls, he got involved with a nonprofit that he helped start called appropriately Big, the Beaver Initiative for Growth, and he just stole from it. It wasn't enough to steal from the state taxpayers by having state-paid staff do his political errands. He just took money from this quote-unquote nonprofit that was supposed to help out his downtrodden district. So, I as the Republican here, I'll stand up for Corbett.
I'm just giving you the point of view, at least, of the defendants in this case and the lawyers. But the amount of money that was used here, was clearly at least $1.4 million, $2 million worth of tax money. And the lack of accountability, the lack of transparency, you didn't know where this money was coming from to pay all these people with bonuses. It was pretty sad. Now, one footnote to this whole bonus gate story that's worth telling is it was leading up to the investigation was well underway. People were anticipating indictments. There were rampant rumors at the state capitol that this was going to show there was a sex room in the Capitol used by the Democrats, Democratic leaders. This sex room, people even knew the floor. They said it's down here, the hallway on the top floor of the Capitol. But in the end, there was no sex room. But in a way, there was. It came out that it wasn't at the Capitol, but the top aide to DeWeese, former Democratic leader, had used tax money to rent the second floor of a cigar store on the south side of Pittsburgh, where he then dispatched his intern and then lover to her job. So she would be out in Pittsburgh when he would visit out there. He was married, lived here in Harrisburg, and this very attractive young intern was then sent to Pittsburgh, where she worked by herself on the second floor of a cigar store.
And the little extra to that is that she was a beauty queen.
Well, yes. You recall specifically what kind of beauty queen, don't you, John?
I do. I remember seeing a picture with the sash, right?
Yeah.
Fayette County, and she was Miss...
She was the Dairy Queen.
The Dairy Queen.
Not to be confused with the place we'd go and stop and get ice cream.
So, again, I think this story is just loaded with lots of only in Pennsylvania flavor. And I got to tell you, like I said, I work for John Purcell. I consider him a friend. I did not know Bill DeWeese until after he got out of jail, where he was famous for writing and singing a rap song about his time in jail. So if you ever meet Bill DeWeese out there, ask him to do his rap song because it's worth listening to. And while we make fun of them a bit because this is just so cray-cray, as the kids say, it's just another example of how, people have different chapters in their lives.
Well, it is, Chris, and I've never seen anything quite like it. I covered Vion's trial for 2 months in Dauphin County Court, and his lawyers were, as Vion wanted, acting out. He wanted a fierce representation. So they didn't care whether they adhered to the decorum of the courtroom or whatever. They were just going to, go for the throat whenever they could.
So at the end, after all those antics, what type of sentence did Vion get?
Well, his was pretty harsh, more than most. His was approximately 4.5 years, and only one person got more, and that was a Republican who was later convicted. But it was one of the stiffest sentences. But he got to serve it also at the camp for the elderly and medical patients out in western Pennsylvania.
John, any final thoughts on the various gates here?
Well, yeah, just a historical one, Chris. Those two were not the first Pennsylvania speakers to go down. Back in the 70s, Herb Feynman from Philadelphia, who was speaker, was convicted of obstruction in a federal case of influence peddling. He appealed. That appeal went the whole way to the U.S. Supreme Court, which refused to take the case. He'd been indicted for accepting payments from parents trying to get their kids into grad schools, med schools. At that time, he was the highest-ranking elected official in Pennsylvania history to go to prison. And remember, the 3 people that went to prison all were speakers, to show you how far we've come in this state, as was Benjamin Franklin.
And one difference between this whole bonus gate investigation and investigations in the past of corruptions, there were numerous convictions in the 70s when former Democratic Governor Milton Schaap was in office, is that large numbers of staffers were convicted with the legislator in bonus gate. You rarely, if ever, saw that before. Now, the prosecutors for Corbett said there was a reason. These people were integral to the conspiracy of what took place. But I'm sure people in the past where there was use of tax dollars or other crimes, staff was involved, but they were overlooked. They weren't prosecuted.
Our secondary focus today on this second episode of the PA Political Digest podcast revolves around some odds and ends, people that got caught up in various scandals. The first one involves 3 Republican sisters, 2 elected, one a Supreme Court justice, the other a state senator, and their sister, who worked for the Supreme Court justice and helped them with their campaigns. 2 Supreme Court justices, one Democrat, one Republican, who got caught up in porn emails. Brad, I guess that would be after Bonus Gate and Computer Gate, that would be Porn Gate. And then finally, my favorite among these 3, an entire court system in Philadelphia, traffic court, just got shut down because it was so pervasively corrupt. So to talk about the Ories, the various Ories sisters, and everyone whose names all started with the same letter, John, let's give it to you.
Well, this is a great political story that in Pennsylvania that I loved covering and writing about. This is a feud between 2 very powerful families in Pittsburgh. It's like Hatfields and the McCoys, played out around 2010. You have the Democratic Zappalas and the Republican Ories. Now, you're going to have to pay attention because this goes quickly. Stephen Zappala Sr. was a state Supreme Court Chief Justice. His son, Junior, was the Allegheny County DA, still is. Another son, Greg, was linked to but never charged in the famous Wilkes-Barre Cash for Kids judicial scandal. He was part owner in a string of juvenile detention centers that judges sent kids to in exchange for cash. A Zappala daughter, Michelle Zappala Peck, narrowly lost a 2009 judicial race. She and her father, then the former Chief Justice, headed the Pennsylvania Casino Association, promoting expanded gambling. Now, the Ories, Republicans, the Zappalas were Democrats, the Ories are Republicans. The Ories hated gambling and opposed it anytime they could. There was State Senator Jane Ory, who was a member of the GOP leadership in the Senate. Her sister, Joan Ory Melvin, was at the time a state Supreme Court justice. Another sister, Janine Ory, everybody in the family, you're right, Chris, their first name began with J, was an aide to the justice and, as you mentioned, helped on both their campaigns. A brother, Jack Ory, sometimes was their lawyer. Another brother, Jerry Ory, worked at the time for then-State Attorney General Tom Corbett. So, 2 busy families, lots of power, contention over gambling. Both Zappala and Senator Ory, DA Zappala and Senator Ory, were viewed at the time as possible candidates to succeed Corbett in a potential Republican-Democrat statewide face-off. But Zappala charges Senator Ory and her sister Janine with state tax dollars, with using state tax dollars and employees for campaign purposes, just like was going on at the time, with Bonusgate. Sister Justice Joan Ory, Melvin, and brother Jack lash out, understandably, charging essentially political vendetta, with Jack Ory claiming that D.A. Zappala vowed to indict anyone who, quote, F's with my family, and promising that, quote, those bitches are going down. Now, I ended a column that I wrote about this with the line, which was my final thought, I love this state.
The genesis of the criminal investigation prompted a lot of speculation in the media, and I wrote about this at the time. The complaint against Jane Ory, the senator, for doing campaign work for her sister, Joan Ory Melvin, the Superior Court judge running for Supreme Court, came from a University of Pittsburgh intern, and that intern had worked in Senator Ory's office. That intern was directed to Senator Ory by a Democratic senator, Sean Logan. Sean Logan had worked for the Zappalas. He had worked for the district attorney as a consumer advocate. So here comes this intern. She watches what's going on, and she, the day after the election, goes to the district attorney's office and tells all, lays out what's been going on there. There was always some suspicion that she was a plant. I'm not saying that she was, but it was a heck of a coincidence that she had this tie, that she came from Logan. However, in the end, there was no, I did an extended interview with her by email, and she claimed that she never met Zappala, never met the district attorney, had no direction, wasn't being used by him. And perhaps that's true, but she was a young liberal intern who maybe someone thought would be a great person to be inside Ory's office. That's all we know.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. If you'd like to send feedback or make a contribution, head over to papoliticaldigest.com. That's papoliticaldigest.com. Thank you.
So, in a desperate attempt to make a long story short, which as you can tell isn't working, these Ories all got convicted of these various things. And John, remind me, which one had to send a picture of herself in handcuffs to people as part of her punishment?
I believe that was the state senator. It was not. It was the justice.
The justice. By the time she was a Supreme Court justice, she had to send out pictures of herself in handcuffs to every judge in the state with an apology letter. That was subsequently changed. I guess somebody thought that was too harsh or reflected too badly on the judiciary. So it was just a letter, an apology letter from her. But I did see the picture, and it did exist, and it was an awful thing for her.
When I heard you, when we talked about this in our pre-production meeting, it reminded me of what happened to me, maybe only once. My family's listening in elementary school. When you're talking too much and your teacher makes you write on the board 100 times, I will not speak out of turn in class, that sort of thing. And you spend your recess time inside doing that. Because here is one judge telling a Supreme Court justice that you have to, on your own dime, get a picture taken of yourself in handcuffs and then write it out saying you were sorry. And then you had to send it to every judge in the state. I mean, that's easily 1,000 people when you think of appellate court judges, county judges, magisterial district justices, federal judges.
Traffic court judges.
A traffic court, my favorite court, yeah.
Well, I imagine it could have been done pretty simply through the Administrative Office of Pennsylvania Courts, so-called AOPC, which if she did it as an email, could have just been fired out to all the judges, as a letter. But it was very humiliating that she even had to do it. There's a footnote to the Ory investigation that's worth telling, and that is Dennis Roddy of the Post-Gazette did this story. He found it in court documents. Zappalas obviously wanted it out, wanted it to be part of it. And it turns out that Jane Ory was frequently visiting these people called the angel women in Monroeville. And these angel women were seers of some sort and soothsayers. and she would see them and supposedly relied heavily on their advice.
I wonder if she told them, I can see you in orange.
I don't think that ever happened, or she might not have gone where she did in terms of her conduct. But in any case, she relied on them pretty heavily, and some of this was supposedly passed along to Joan. I never heard that Joan actually went to see the Angel Ladies.
Moving on, we're now going to talk about two Supreme Court justices who got taken down because of porn emails, which we're calling everything Gate still, Brad. So this was Porngate, and that was Justices McCaffrey and Eakin, one a Democrat, one a Republican.
Yeah, they were casualties of a much broader scandal called Porngate, which involved the Attorney General's office primarily getting these porn emails. Some were pure porn, there's no question about it. A lot were just dirty jokes, some were racial jokes, some were insulting to women. But these made the rounds of the Attorney General's office and led to a scandal there that eventually enveloped the former Attorney General, Kathleen Kane. But there is some issue here with the judges because Seamus McCaffrey, a Supreme Court justice, had been a homicide cop in Philadelphia, and a former cop buddy of his was sending him some of the emails. And McCaffrey was sending those into prosecutors he knew in the court system. And various judges got a hold of them too, and eventually Justice Aiken got a hold of them, and the two were finally suspended and then resigned for their role in having this porn.
John, so you want to remind us why they've resigned?
Yeah, look, you have to remember, this is way before Me Too, and some of the stuff was really innocent and some of it was really bad. I mean, Kathleen Kane's own twin sister, Ellen, who was a prosecutor in the office of Attorney General, had one that I can't imagine anyone would send today. It was a picture of a woman smiling with facial bruises, and the caption said, "Domestic violence, because sometimes you have to tell her more than once." So, yeah, I mean, it was a real mess, there's no question. Seamus McCaffrey from Philadelphia was a character. I mean, he was born in Belfast, an Irish immigrant. 20 years he was a Philly cop, and he spent his off time going to college and going to law school, became a municipal judge, and got national attention as judge of the Eagles Court. I mean, the fans I don't have to tell anybody in this room, the fans at home games for the Philadelphia Eagles can get a little rowdy.
At the old Vet Stadium.
At the old Vet Stadium, yeah, and that's where it was. There was an Eagles Court. He was there for every home game. Anybody who got in trouble dragged down to him. They had a little lockup there, and he got, again, national attention for that. He rode his red Harley Davidson all over the state to win a Supreme Court seat. Then came Porngate, suspended, resigned, over. And Mike Eakin was from Cumberland County. He had been the DA in Cumberland County before he ran for judge, and he made national news in a kind of a cute way, because he used to write opinions in rhymes, and he became known as the rhyming judge. New York Times did a big piece on him. Other justices were not happy about it, probably jealous, but they said it kind of diminished the seriousness of the court. Anyway, in the whole Porngate thing, he accused McCafferty of trying to blackmail him into support of McCafferty in exchange for not leaking his emails. McCafferty, of course, denied that. Eakin ultimately suspended first and then also resigned.
Now we're going to move on to the final part of our secondary focus today, which is my personal favorite. John earlier told me I was obsessed with this, and well, I'm hosting the podcast, so I can be obsessed with it, right, John? So this is an entire court system in Philadelphia, the traffic court, that was just shut down because of pervasive corruption. In June of 2013, they had an interview with then Senate Republican leader Dominic Pileggi, who now ironically is a judge in Delaware County, that talked about that the Senate had passed a bill to do away with the entire court system. As a political consultant, I find this next nugget very interesting. The story from WHYY Radio at the time said, currently scheduled traffic court judicial elections will now be canceled. So they canceled an entire court system and then canceled the elections. That, to me, is unprecedented. This is the quote from Dominic Pileggi, again, at the time the Senate Republican leader and now a judge. Quote, "Through the last 50 years, the Philadelphia Traffic Court has demonstrated a remarkable ability to be the center of scandal after scandal, some criminal in nature and others the result of basic incompetence. The court has proven to be immune to all reform efforts." So again, people just threw up their hands and said, we can't reform it. We can't find honest people to be traffic court judges, so we'll just blow it up.
One more point on that. One of the traffic court judges was ensnared in the undercover investigation by the Attorney General's office, where they had this agent working for the Attorney General's office recording himself giving cash to different legislators primarily. But he also gave it to this traffic court judge, and she accepted it and was videotaped taking a Tiffany necklace. And it was a bribe, and, she had to plead guilty to that, so...
Yeah, I mean, the traffic court, to me, I sat in it one day, and it was an endless day. It was just an awful place to be. But having written about Philadelphia for so long, it just, to me, it wasn't surprising or different or anything other than Philadelphia.
Well, on that terrific note, we're going to end episode 2 of the Pennsylvania Political Digest podcast, A Stroll Through the Annals of Pennsylvania Political Corruption. I want to thank our esteemed journalists, John Baer and Brad Bumstead. I want to thank our sound engineer, Tucker Nicholas. Thank you. The bumper music you've heard is courtesy of Interstate 81. I'm your host, Republican political consultant Christopher Nicholas. If you have any comments about our podcast, any tips, any replies, please send your emails to papoliticaldigest@gmail.com. That's papoliticaldigest@gmail.com. If they're interesting, we might read them on the air. Copyright 2023 Eagle Consulting Group, Inc.